Dean Legge Show. At the end of Georgia's 2014 season, Bulldogs losing to Georgia Tech in overtime, 30-24 in Athens this past Saturday. Disappointing into a season that certainly was disappointing at times, and then at other times was not at all. It was a very impressive set of games when you start talking about what Georgia did to Missouri, Clemson, Auburn, Arkansas. Well, basically every game they didn't they didn't lose. Georgia was pretty impressive in, except the Tennessee game. So, um, but Georgia didn't get to Atlanta, which I thought was where they should have wound up. I still think they should have wound up there. They didn't, and you know, after a season like this, and certainly after last year's season, which was dramatically more traumatic than this 9-3 year, a lot of people express their frustration in different ways. Um, you can usually tell if someone's pretty extreme that they want the coach fired. I don't think there's any reason to fire Mark Richt, not even close. And I think you can see the long-term trajectory of the program has really never been better. Maybe with the exception of just before the 2002 season, but of course then you didn't know how good Georgia would be over the next um, four seasons, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I don't think that people are real happy with the loss to Georgia Tech. I think that's brought down the season for sure. I mean, I don't think Georgia should ever lose to Georgia Tech, and I'm not being naive when I say that. If you look at this past game, um, I don't think Tech necessarily played well, but Georgia certainly lost that game more than Georgia Tech won it, and that's something people are frustrated with. The good news about that is that over time you typically don't lose games that you're supposed to win in that fashion. I mean, that was the wildest game I've seen in forever. But frankly, losing two balls at the 1 yard line just before you're going to score, um, and the decision to squib kick it, although the squib kick didn't kill Georgia, it was the scramble afterwards that really did. Those two things really cost Georgia in the end. Really a miraculous win in many ways for Georgia Tech. Um, all right, let's get to the questions. Obviously, there has been a change in the strength and conditioning department with Joe Tereshinski leaving. So there's a few questions in here about that. I think this is a real positive. I don't know if there are any people that love Georgia more than Joe T, but there's got to be a little bit more expertise brought in, and you know you don't want to cut down a tree with an axe anymore. I don't. So I think Georgia's going to get a little bit more modern here in the near future, um, and we'll see. I think it will help. I don't know how many points a game more it helps. Maybe one or two each game in the season, and they sure could have used that extra point on Saturday. Do you think Roquan Smith, if he commits, will start day one at inside linebacker at Georgia? Probably not day one, but I do think that he'll start. Yeah. There's a lot of eagerness to get Roquan Smith on campus. From insiders, they think that he's as good as it gets out there in the inside linebacker. Talking about Marshall Morgan learning how to correctly wear football pants. Let me see what you're talking about, because I don't know if I know what you're talking about. If I were Georgia, I wouldn't want Marshall Morgan to change a ton. Maybe just make little, 20, 30-yard kicks at South Carolina would be about all I would change about Marshall Morgan. He's really had a good year, comparatively speaking. I get your point about the Marshall or the John Wooden discussion, but if every coach were John Wooden, everybody would win like UCLA won, and that's just not reality. What's he doing wrong? I don't know. I get the pants are relatively high, and he rolls them down the pants over the top of the belt. I don't know. Any ideas who Georgia's looking for at strength and conditioning? Um, Someone a little bit more modern. Do you feel like Georgia will lose any more coaches in the off season? Boy, they always do. So I would expect that. I don't. I couldn't tell you who it is. It would seem to me it would be more a defensive person than offense. But they always lose people. What's your best guesstimation on who fills out the last spots in this class? Do you think Jefferson sticks or moves on? These are all questions from Aspen Dog. Van Jefferson, I think, will probably stick around. There was certainly plenty of scuttlebutt that he would maybe go to Tennessee. You got to wonder with Tennessee. I mean, I had I can't remember who it was the other day talk about Tennessee, and Butch Jones is 2 games over 500 after 2 years, and there's not a lack of talent at Tennessee. There really isn't. Now they're not as talented as most of the other teams around, but there's enough to where they could win a few more games than they have won. I mean, you're telling me Tennessee was much worse than Florida? That game was in Knoxville, so I think there's been you can only be um, almost there so many times. I think Georgia fans have that frustration as far as the national championship is concerned with Mark Richt, but Mark Richt's done vastly more than Butch Jones has. Any new updates or timeline for indoor practice facility? No, not right now. I don't think they can take action until the spring. Certainly not in December. I think Jeremy Pruitt probably could have gone without saying that the way he did. He didn't handle that right. He may have been correct in what he was saying, but I don't think he handled that the right way. Any rumblings about who may not leave the program for professional or possible transfers? Obviously, I think we're going to see a couple more. We could see a couple more transfers. I was led to believe for a long time. Jordan Jenkins is coming back. I've not talked with anybody in the Theus clan about John, but my expectation is John Theus will come back. My understanding for the longest time was that Leonard Floyd would leave, but I'm not as certain about that as I once was. I think Malcolm Mitchell may be the one closer to leaving than anybody else. And I would understand that. I would understand Marshall coming back. I would understand him leaving. I would understand Leonard coming back. I would understand him leaving. But I think the thing anymore, like with Leonard, the difference between late second round or early third round money and late first round money is a huge pile. And first round is guaranteed an extra year, and there's more money involved with this new CBA the NFL and its organization and its union has signed. So there really is an incentive to stay if you should stay, and you're not guaranteed a first round pick. But I don't think anybody should hate Leonard if he leaves. Some ways, I think his situation, being from Eastman and his family situation, maybe he should go. But we'll see. With Malcolm, I think is basically just about injuries. He's relatively healthy. Of course, he only played about 4-5 games this year where he really was healthy. I mean, look to me from the Florida game on, he was more like himself. I don't know if NFL people are going to be super pumped up about him. I mean, he basically has played 2.5 college years, most of 11, most of 12, none of 13, and about half of 14. So that's not a lot of data to work with. UJ Dark Forever 08. Who do you believe will make a significant impact from 15 class? Listen, we're at everybody always asks a question. We're at the stage now with Georgia where if you're a freshman and you come in and you're making a significant impact, you're going to have to be really special. This isn't like 09 and 10 where the program was in real trouble and there could be guys that could come in. There's only one or two. I mean, like, did Sony Michel have a significant impact? I would say he did not. I would say Nick Chubb did for sure this past year. You can make the argument Leonard Floyd had impact. I don't know if he had significant impact. So that's my my barometer. I would say Roquan Smith, if he goes to Georgia, will play a lot. Trenton Thompson, Slayton, and Goodwin. Now, beyond that, it's harder for me to know. I mean, I know I've seen Goodwin. Godwin is a freaking stud. He's going to play, and he's going to probably start somewhere. But off the top of my head, I mean, Raquan Smith, I think just because of the void at linebacker and no certain backup right there, that's what I mean. I think I'm just looking at the list right now. Darius Slayton will play. Jarvis Wilson might be a big time steal. Roundtree will probably play. Abram, I'm trying to remember which one of those two guys is bigger. No, it's Abram. Those two kids from Mississippi are bigger kids. I think Barnett redshirts. Van Jefferson will play. Ledbetter will play a significant amount. Stanley's coming off an ACL. Trenton Thompson will play a lot. Probably Patrick Allen will probably play. Chris Carson, running back. If that everything works out there, he probably would play. Chigbu probably will play. Dante Williams. I don't know. Sage Harden should redshirt. Jackson Harris, because he plays tight end, maybe would play. McCray should redshirt. Baker. With all the corners, Jawan Taylor should redshirt. With all the corners, bets are off because they're trying to figure out. I mean, they got a walk on and 2 3-stars starting in their secondary right now. I mean, people wanting Georgia to win the national championship are not taking into account their massive holes. They played without their best player for half the season this year. Their quarterback was quite limited, although he played drastically better after going to play the Gators. Justin Young certainly is going to redshirt. Natrez Patrick, he'll probably play. Chauncey Rivers redshirt. Godwin certainly plays. Devondre Seymour, he will play. Shakiri Wilson probably will play because he's a receiver. So, I don't know. I mean, significant impact, I'm not sure. Guys who redshirted this year who could contribute next season. Good question, by the way. All this stuff is stuff you can find on Scout too. Just looking. I mean, I know I add opinion. A lot of guys didn't redshirt. Maybe Jake Edwards. Did you say significant? Good contributor. I would say Bing Dukes is going to get his shot. Keon Brown is going to get his shot. They played a lot of young guys in this group. Georgia plays relatively young guys quite a bit. Do you have official list of who will take? Do you have a list of officials who will take? No, it's the gala. Well, we know DeAndre Walker is going to be there as an official, but all that stuff that can change so quickly. It's hard for me. I mean, that's a week away from now, so that's hard for me to tell you. That could even change. DeAndre Walker could not. That could change with him. Swanee Dog 03 again asks, what do you suspect Richt has learned from this season in particular? Man, it's been a heck of a 2-year stretch for Mark Richt. This has got to be the most turbulent 2 years he's had in coaching. Period. I think he's learned when not to press the panic button. That seems certain. He's well aware of when to do that and when not to do that. But he's imperfect, and he, like every coach, is imperfect, by the way. But he, I think the thing he either hasn't learned or they didn't do a great job of this year is they've got to be better at executing in rivalry games. I mean, if you talk about Georgia Tech and Florida, now I mean obviously Auburn is a rivalry game, and they absolutely destroyed them. But one or two, let's just not even say rivalry games and include South Carolina in this. Literally, Georgia is 2 plays from playing in the SEC. I mean, they're 1 play from playing in the SEC championship, and that 1 play could have been any number of things. Could have been South Carolina. It could have been scoring a touchdown late against South Carolina. It could have been that holding call that was total garbage against Brandon Cublano against South Carolina. It could have been South Carolina holding on to beat Missouri. It could have been, it could be any game that was played between that time. Georgia Tech game was 1 play. I don't doubt Mark Richt understands and appreciates that a season can change negatively or positively with 1 play. I don't know if the players totally understand that. The program last year was 8-5 with close games with Clemson, South Carolina, Tennessee, LSU, Auburn, Nebraska, Georgia Tech. They played like 10 make or break in 1 play games. This year they played 4. They blew everybody out in 8 games. They beat Tennessee by 3. They lost to Georgia Tech by 6 in possession in overtime. They lost to South Carolina by 3, and then Florida blew them out. So it's easy to say, but if they could just continue doing what they're doing when they're blowing people out and figure out how to win the tighter games. Because if you go back and look now, they've lost tight games. I mean, every game they lose is tight, basically. I mean, the last 2 times they don't exactly make a habit of getting blown out. Okay, the game with Tech, obviously 1 possession. The game with South Carolina this year, 1 possession. The game with Nebraska last year, 1 possession. The game with Auburn last year, 1 possession. The game with Vanderbilt last year, 1 possession. The game with with Clemson, 1 possession. So, obviously Alabama in 2012, 1 possession. Georgia's like that far away. Now, if you hate Mark Richt, if you are just a person, or let's just say you don't hate Mark Richt, if you're just a negative person, you'll say, well, they don't get it done. Well, everybody doesn't get it done every single season except one team. I mean, it's gotten to the stage at Georgia where nothing other than a national championship is going to make people happy. And that's what ran Steve Spurrier out of Florida. And people have their own perception. I'm not a person that lives their life thinking of the negative all the time or thinking what can't happen. Because I think this is just my life. If you think about what you can't do, you'll never accomplish anything. If you set your goals high, then that's what you're going to go get. And I think that understanding how close Georgia is the massive frustration in a lot of ways. Gavin Dog, what is the consensus of the Joe T's resignation affect for any recruit? No recruit's going to care. What would Georgia look internally for the replacement of Joe Tereshinski? As I understand it, they are not looking internally. So that would surprise me. That would shock me at this stage. Would Georgia get serious about strength and conditioning and really pull out the checkbook to get a top candidates for strength and conditioning program? Well, I think they can get a very good one for $200,000, $250,000 if they want, but that's up to them. And I think that's an appropriate dollar amount. The SEC strength and conditioning coaches, the top position is all over the map. I mean, just because you're paying $300,000, $400,000, $200,000 doesn't mean you're getting what you want or you need from that position. What would the wish list look like for the strength and conditioning people? Well, I think you're talking. I mean, the easy, sort of answer is Ryan Golden would be one person that I think you would need to talk to. I would look at schools like Missouri, who seem to do very well with their strength and conditioning program. I don't think a Missouri strength and conditioning person is going to come to Georgia, but LSU has a very good strength and conditioning head guy. Stanford has very good. So you just start with there. I certainly, personally, I would talk with Ryan Golden and see what he has to say. I mean, he's been very good for a long time. As Fletcher Page tweeted out not that long ago, it's no coincidence that, a lot of Georgia's very good players or players who achieve more than they should are, Ryan Golden clients. What do you think that Langley did not make the cut, or did he not just fit? I don't know what to. I mean, Brennan Langley. I don't know if it was just never going to work or what. I don't think he was that great as a defensive player. I think as an offensive guy, he wasn't spectacular. He had a very good body. Some guys just don't work. Danger Ranger 69-69. Why can't Georgia pull it together like Alabama and win big? Why do teams not fear to play Georgia like they do Alabama and LSU? Richt is 12-2 against Georgia Tech, 8-6 against South Carolina. Which of those is more insulting to lose? Well, this is a good example of a person that is just not going to be happy, and I'm not going to bother dealing with the questions. I don't know how to pronounce this name. Richt, Riot, Riotch. Do you still believe in the last 20 years still believe that the last 20 players on a roster do not make a difference in the success of a season? We were essentially kicked off the entire defensive backfield and started walking. Yeah, I still don't think you win championships with players. What would that be? 65 through 85, because they can't play in the games. They were literally prohibited from playing in SEC games. So, that's, I know I'm being very literal there. But no, did J.J. Green, with the exception of the Tennessee game in 2013, did he make a difference in the grand scheme? He didn't even play this year. If you're depending on Brendan Douglas, aren't you in some serious trouble? No offense to Brendan. Come on. Let's be honest here. Let's be realistic. Follow-up. Doesn't it seem that Pruitt's arrival has drastically changed the way Georgia recruits? It seems now we're expecting attrition and over-signing for it. Well, I definitely agree that he's changed, not just changed, but as you say, drastically changed the way Georgia recruits. There's no question about that. I don't know if they're expecting attrition. Let me be more specific about that. I think they were well aware that J.J. Green, Brendan Langley, etc., were not going to be here after this season. If you look at J.J., who's a very good high school, almost great high school player, and a kid that has not gotten in trouble at Georgia, he does not have the measurables to play in the SEC. Now, he was not in Georgia's bottom 20, which sort of tells you where they're at. They still have to fill a full 85. That's been the number one criticism of Mark Richt. That's been the number one correct criticism of him. But the reality is those bottom 20 guys, in terms of bylaws, they can't play in the games. If you're saying that Lamont Gilliard is helping David Andrews get better, I just disagree with you. So now, eventually those guys will play, yes. But Lorenzo Carter was never at the bottom 20. Damian Swan was never at the bottom 20. Bryce Ramsey's never at the bottom 20. Nick Chubb was never bottom 20. Sonny Michel was never bottom 20. Ryan Rankin, J.J. Green, Brendan Langley, Dietrich Dukes this year. So that's my point. We may be arguing over semantics here. Anyway, back to your question. The attrition. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they're going to sort of run anybody else off or let unhappy people go. But I think we've seen with Shaq Jones gone, Rico Johnson's condition, JJ, Brendan. They here's the secret. They weren't enthralled with what they inherited from Todd Grantham in the secondary. They just haven't been. And that's Jeremy's group. And so I think the only guy who's going to start next year for certain that started this year is Dominic Sanders back there. I don't think there's any guarantee Quincy Mauger is going to play back there. I don't think there's any guarantee, or he'll play, but I don't know if there's any guarantee that he's going to start. I don't think there's any guarantee, that Aaron Davis is going to play. Aaron Davis will walk on. That can't happen. That cannot happen. He's not a fullback. Gavin Dog, with the transfers that are taking place, will Georgia be able to fill up all the spots for next year? Will there be a few available for next season? It looks to me like they're going to sign over 30. So it's going to be right on 85. It could be a little over or a little under. It's hard to totally know. Dean, now that we've seen several defensive losses, mostly defensive backs, can we attribute that to Jeremy Pruitt's philosophy change? If so, what's that philosophy? Seems like things are changing routinely on that side of the ball. I think they want taller, longer defensive backs. Anybody that's under 5'11" basically can forget it. And they went virtually the entire season trying to figure out who they could depend on back there outside of Damian Swann. And then it became they could literally depend on Swann and Sanders. Other than that, it was rotating. And, you saw Aaron Davis in, you saw Aaron Davis out. You saw Corey Moore in, you saw him out. You saw Mauger in, you saw him out. Although Mauger was in there a lot more than he was out. They don't have what they want, which means from their view, they don't have what they need. And that's part of taking over a job like this. I mean, that secondary last year, if you're still talking about having Josh Harvey-Clemens, Trey Matthews, Shaq, did I say Trey Wiggins? Shaq Wiggins, Trey Matthews. At least those guys would have been second-year players in the program. They've started all over, and this will be coming up in 15. This will be the third season without a basic core group in the secondary coming back. And in 9, some of the guys that were sort of superstars in 12, they started playing in 9. Then they started in 10. They started in 11, and they started in 12. In 13, those guys are all gone. They started 1 year and they left. 14, I don't know if those guys are going to make it back. I mean, J.J. Green started a game. That is crazy. He started a game. Mauger started a game. Aaron Davis started a game. Rico started a game. Sanders started a game. Swann started a game. That's 7. Corey Moore started a game. I mean, that's just too many people. After a while, you got to get your guys and go. So anyway, they were just trying to figure out what they had. I thought they played better as the season went on. There's no question. They got destroyed, okay, by South Carolina. I mean, Jeremy Pruitt just he made some mistakes. And Steve Spurrier is a very good coach. He doesn't have what he had at Florida State in the secondary. Now, the front 7 for Georgia I thought was pretty good. It wasn't great all the time, and there is a learning curve for Pruitt to deal with as far as dealing with some of these SEC offenses as well, and Georgia Tech. I mean, he didn't – I don't think Florida State played Georgia Tech last year, so he didn't see the literal triple option while he was at Florida State. Okay, Richt. Dean, you said that According to a lot of folks in the program, Bryce Ramsey is the most talented quarterback of the Richt era. One, do you believe this sets Bryce up for failure by setting expectations so high before even taking a meaningful step? Maybe. Yeah, I mean, that's not ideal. but you're going to have expectations if you're the quarterback at Georgia, no matter what. I mean, there were expectations on Hudson this year that he just physically could not handle. I mean, like not mentally. I mean, Hudson certainly understood and knew what he had to do mentally, but I mean, he just can't make certain throws. So it's not just me saying that about Bryce Ramsey now. There's just a lot of people saying this kid is big time special. Two, is it your personal belief that Bryce could be the best era? Is it also your personal belief that Bryce could be the best quarterback of the Richt era? And if so, how did he not beat Mason out at some point in the season? Well, he almost did beat Mason out. Frankly, that's not been well reported, but that is true. Later in the season, I mean, after the Florida game, Georgia was looking at a lot of different options, and there was a competition that week, and it looked like it was very possible Bryce was going to start that Kentucky game. Nobody's aware of that, and that's fine. But why didn't he beat Hudson Mason out? Because Hudson was the starter at the beginning of the season, and in order to be the starter at the beginning of the season, you basically need to win the spring before. Georgia's not going to have. I mean, once in 14 years, Georgia's had an open competition in the fall. It just doesn't happen, and that was in 2006. So when Hudson won it in 12, going in, Bryce had been there for about a year and 4 months, something like that. By the way, Jacob Park's very good too. It's not like he's got one hand or something like that. I mean, Jacob Park's very good too. They're both more talented than Hudson. By the time the season started, and Georgia, beat Clemson, lost to South Carolina, there was really no reason to make a change because sooner rather than later, South Carolina had already lost a game or two, whatever it was. So Georgia was completely in the East mix. They were in the East mix until whenever it was. I think I would have started Hudson. That doesn't mean that Hudson's more talented than Bryce, because he's not. So it's not exclusively about talent. A lot of times it is about experience. A lot of times it is about correct management of the game, getting into this play, out of this play. That's where Bryce was weak, understandably. That's where Aaron Murray was weak. That's where Matthew was weak. So that's the sort of stuff that Bryce and Jacob after him, they will all have to work on. Quarterback at Georgia is not something people need to be concerned about in the future. You have, at a minimum, Bryce Ramsey. You also have Jacob Park, who is hardly bad. And then after that, you would, in theory, have Jacob Eason. You have a guy who's developed 2 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks in Mark Richt. You've got Mike Bobo, who, if anybody tells you he can't develop a quarterback, you shouldn't argue. You should just turn and walk away, because they just have no idea what they're talking about. And so Bryce has unlimited potential. However, that does not mean that he certainly will win the national championship, be the number 1 overall pick, and win the Heisman Trophy. I mean, we all know it's more complicated than, this guy is really good. But we're going to see. We're going to see if Bryce has, well, I know he has physically what it takes. That is not in question. We're going to see if he has the drive, determination, and the wherewithal to deal with what it is to be the quarterback at Georgia. Please don't assume incorrectly that because Matthew Stafford couldn't beat out Joe Tereshinski at the start of the season, and that Georgia was out of the race in the East in 2006 halfway through the season after it lost to Vanderbilt, that Matthew Stafford wasn't better than Joe Tereshinski, because he always was. So, Aaron Murray probably should have played in 2009, but he was a little bit hurt, and he didn't. People. I mean, Bryce is a freshman. He's a redshirt freshman. Hudson's a fifth-year senior. The fifth-year senior should win. So, anyway, all right, Dean Legge Show. We'll do this each week.